The morning sun cast long shadows across Lake Pine Summer Camp as Staff Sergeant James Cooper pulled up to the front gate in his dusty black pickup truck. His right hand unconsciously brushed against the dog tags hanging beneath his simple gray t-shirt, a habit he hadn't shaken even 3 months after leaving active duty. The truck's tires crunched over the gravel path as he drove past the welcome sign that read Lake Pine Summer Camp, where adventures begin. At 42 years old, Cooper still maintained the sharp physical condition from his 15 years with the Army Rangers. His short-cropped black hair was starting to show touches of gray at the temples, and faint crow's feet marked the corners of his alert brown eyes. Those eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, another habit from his military days that had kept him and his men alive through 3 combat tours. Camp Director Sarah Chen waited for him near the main office, a petite woman in her 50s wearing cargo shorts and the camp's green polo shirt. She walked over as Cooper stepped out of his truck, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Staff Sergeant Cooper, welcome to Lake Pine. Thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Just Cooper is fine, ma'am," he replied, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl from his Tennessee upbringing. "I left the Army life behind 3 months ago." As they walked toward the office, Cooper noticed a group of 3 motorcycles parked across the lake, their riders watching the camp entrance. He made a mental note but kept his face neutral, focusing on Director Chen's introduction to the camp. "We got 120 kids this summer, ages 8 to 15, she explained, leading him past the dining hall. "Usually, it's a peaceful place, but these past few weeks," she paused, worry lines creasing her forehead. "Tell me about the trouble," Cooper said quietly, still watching their surroundings as they walked. "It started with small things, loud motorcycles driving by at night, empty beer cans in our parking lot. Then they started showing up during the day, watching the kids swim. Last week, they threatened one of our junior counselors who was closing up the boathouse." Her voice trembled slightly. "The local police are stretched thin, and we're 20 minutes from the nearest station." Cooper nodded, understanding why she'd specifically sought out someone with his background. As they rounded the dining hall, the sounds of children playing reached them. The main activity area was filled with kids in bright t-shirts, playing basketball, practicing archery, and running between activity stations. A young counselor jogged up to them, slightly out of breath. "Director Chen, Tommy's stuck in a tree again by the nature trail." Chen sighed, then turned to Cooper. "Duty calls. Jerry here can show you to your cabin, then give you a tour of the grounds." As Jerry led him toward the staff cabins, Cooper caught sight of the bikers again, now moving along the road that circled the lake. Their leather vests displayed patches he couldn't quite make out at this distance, but their presence set off warning bells from his years of threat assessment. The cabin was simple but comfortable, a single room with a bed, desk, small bathroom, and a window overlooking the lake. Cooper set down his duffel bag and followed Jerry on the tour, paying careful attention to the layout of the grounds, escape routes, and vulnerable points in the camp's security. They ended the tour at the boathouse, where a group of older campers was learning kayaking basics. The kids' laughter echoed across the water, and Cooper felt something shift inside him. After months of struggling to find his place in civilian life, watching these kids enjoy their summer without fear, it gave him a sense of purpose he'd been missing. A motorcycle engine roared in the distance, and Cooper watched as several kids jumped at the sound. His jaw tightened slightly. He'd seen enough combat to know that fear was a weapon, and someone was deliberately using it against these children. As the sun began to set over Lake Pine, Cooper sat at his new desk, making detailed notes about the camp's layout and security needs. The distant rumble of motorcycles came and went, but he remained focused on his work. He had protected his men through 3 tours in the world's most dangerous places. Now, he had a new mission, making sure these kids could have the summer they deserved, free from fear and intimidation. What the bikers didn't know yet was that they had just made a serious mistake. They thought they were dealing with a simple summer camp. Instead, they had just caught the attention of a highly trained Army Ranger who specialized in protecting the vulnerable and neutralizing threats. And James Cooper took his missions very seriously. 3 days into his new job at Lake Pine Summer Camp, Cooper sat in Director Chen's office, studying the letter that had arrived that morning. The paper was cheap, but the message was clear. $5,000 a month for protection services from the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club. Cooper's jaw tightened as he read the poorly spelled threats about what would happen if the camp refused to pay. They dropped it off at dawn. Director Chen said, her hands gripping a coffee mug too tightly. The night guard saw 3 bikes, but they were gone before he could get a good look. Cooper set the letter down carefully. Have they made demands like this before? 2 weeks ago, we refused, and that's when the harassment started. She looked out the window, where kids were lining up for breakfast in the dining hall. We're not a rich camp, Cooper. Most of our kids are here on scholarships. We barely break even as it is. The sound of motorcycles echoed across the lake, making them both turn. 5 bikes rolled past the camp's main entrance, moving slowly. Cooper counted 3 riders wearing the Devil's Hands patches, black devils with red eyes, while 2 others wore prospect vests, marking them as new members trying to prove themselves. They're getting bolder, Cooper noted, watching how the bikers revved their engines as they passed groups of children. He'd spent the past few days observing their patterns. They usually appeared during mealtimes or scheduled activities, when they could disrupt the most kids at once. Later that afternoon, Cooper was teaching a group of 12-year-olds basic camping skills when the bikers returned. This time, they circled the lake 3 times, their engines drowning out his instructions. He watched as Tommy, the same kid who'd been stuck in the tree earlier that week, dropped his rope and covered his ears. Hey, it's okay, Cooper said, kneeling beside the boy. Let's focus on this knot. You're doing great with the figure 8. But Cooper's trained eyes didn't miss how the other kids jumped at each engine rev, or how the junior counselors kept glancing nervously at the road. Fear was spreading through the camp like a virus, exactly as the Devil's Hand intended. That evening, Cooper met with the camp staff after the kids were asleep. 20 worried faces looked back at him in the dining hall's dim light. He'd seen similar looks before, on civilians in war zones. People who felt helpless against a threat they couldn't fight. Starting tomorrow, we change our routine, Cooper announced, his voice calm but firm. We'll move archery and crafts away from the road. Swimming activities will stay close to the boathouse. Every activity needs 2 counselors minimum. But that's letting them win, Jerry protested. We're changing our whole program because of them. Cooper shook his head. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about protecting the kids while we deal with the threat. He didn't mention that he'd already started documenting every appearance, taking photos, and noting license plate numbers. His Rangers training had taught him that good intelligence was crucial before any operation. The meeting was interrupted by the roar of engines, louder this time and much closer. Cooper moved quickly to the window. 3 bikes had pulled into the camp's parking lot, their headlights sweeping across the buildings. He recognized the lead rider's patch, a snake wrapped around a devil, marking him as Jake, the Snake Martinez, the club's leader. Everyone stay calm, Cooper ordered, but the counselors were already scrambling to the windows. The bikers sat there for 5 long minutes, revving their engines in the dark. Cooper used the time to study their positions, their weapons. 2 had visible knife shades, 1 had something heavy in his vest, and their formation. Finally, Martinez raised his fist, and the bikes roared away into the night. Later, doing his final rounds, Cooper found what they'd left behind, a dead snake nailed to the camp's welcome sign. He removed it quietly, noting the carpenter's nails and hardware store hammer they'd used. Every detail could be useful later. Back in his cabin, Cooper added the night's events to his growing file. The Devil's Hand was escalating faster than he'd expected. They were used to easy targets, shopkeepers and small business owners who couldn't fight back, but they made a crucial mistake in targeting the camp. Because unlike their other victims, Lake Pine now had someone who understood their tactics. Someone who had spent years learning how to protect the vulnerable from those who use fear as a weapon. And as Cooper reviewed his notes under the cabin's single light, he began forming a plan that would teach the Devil's Hand a lesson about choosing the wrong target. The campfire crackled under a star-filled sky as 30 kids roasted marshmallows and sang songs. Cooper stood at the edge of the light, his back to the darkness, watching the children enjoy themselves. For the first time that week, the sound of motorcycles hadn't interrupted the evening activities. Jenny, one of the junior counselors, was leading the group in a ghost story when Cooper's trained ears caught a different sound, the soft crunch of boots on gravel, coming from behind the nearby trees. He touched his radio twice, signaling Jerry at the other end of the camping area to be alert. 3 shadows detached themselves from the tree line. Cooper recognized Jake the Snake Martinez from his surveillance photos, a tall man with a gray-streaked beard and a snake tattoo curling up his neck. Two other bikers flanked him, both younger and trying hard to look tough in their leather vests. Before they could get closer to the campfire, Cooper moved to intercept them. His boots made no sound on the grass as he approached, his movement smooth and purposeful. He positioned himself so that the kids couldn't see what was happening, their view blocked by the equipment shed. "Evening, gentlemen," Cooper said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to stop them in their tracks. "You're on private property." Martinez grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Just taking a walk, friend. Nice night for it." His eyes moved past Cooper to the campfire. "Sweet setup you got here. Shame if something happened to disturb all these happy campers." Cooper took one step forward, his movement causing all three men to shift their weight unconsciously. He'd seen that reaction before, the instinctive response of people who sensed a predator in their midst. "Let me be clear," Cooper said, his voice still conversational but carrying an edge that made the younger bikers glance at each other. "You're going to turn around and leave the same way you came in. Now." The bigger of the two younger bikers, wearing a vest with bruiser stitched on it, puffed up his chest. "Do you know who you're talking to, Rent-A-Cop?" Cooper didn't blink. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. 3 members of the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club, trespassing on private property where children are present." His eyes locked onto Martinez. "That's a serious offense, especially given your club's recent harassment of this camp." Martinez's smile faded slightly. "Sounds like you've been doing your homework, friend. But maybe you need to do more." He spread his arms, showing off the patches on his vest. "We're not some bunch of weekend riders. We own this territory." "No," Cooper said simply. "You don't." Something in his tone made Martinez really look at him for the first time. Cooper stood relaxed but balanced, his hands loose at his sides. Nothing about his stance was aggressive, but something in his stillness made the hair on the back of Martinez's neck rise. "You military?" Martinez asked, his eyes narrowing. "Rangers," Cooper replied. 15 years. 3 combat tours." He took another step forward, and this time all 3 men took an unconscious step back. "So when I tell you to leave, understand that I'm being polite. For now." A burst of laughter from the campfire broke the tension. Martinez glanced past Cooper at the children, then back at the man standing between him and his intended targets. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant chirp of crickets. "Come on, boys," Martinez finally said, his gold tooth glinting as he forced another smile. "Let's give the ex-soldier some space to think about his situation." He pointed at Cooper. "This isn't over, friend. Not by a long shot." Cooper watched them retreat into the darkness, noting how they moved, how they communicated with subtle gestures, which one looked back before disappearing into the trees. Every detail could be useful later. When he was sure they were gone, Cooper circled the entire campground before returning to the fire. The kids were still singing, unaware of what had just happened. Jenny gave him a questioning look, but he just nodded reassuringly. Later that night, after the campers were safely in their cabins, Cooper sat at his desk writing his report. He documented every word of the conversation, every observation about the 3 men, and every detail that might matter. In the margin, he made a note. Martinez, former military, recognizes training, personal history worth checking. The distant sound of motorcycles echoed across the lake, but it was farther away this time. Cooper allowed himself a small smile. The Devil's Hand had come looking to intimidate what they thought would be an easy target. Instead, they'd found something they didn't expect, someone who understood violence far better than they did, and knew exactly how to stand against it. But Cooper also knew that back-down bullies often came back harder. The night's small victory would only make them more determined to prove their power. The real test was still to come, and he needed to be ready when it did. Cooper knew something was wrong the moment he arrived at the boathouse for morning inspection. The padlock on the door hung broken, and fresh tire tracks marked the dirt path leading to the building. He drew his flashlight and moved carefully around the structure, checking for any unwanted visitors before approaching the entrance. Inside, the damage was obvious. Someone had gone through the building with purpose. Life jackets were slashed and scattered across the floor. Oars were broken and splintered. On the far wall, spray painted in red, was a crude drawing of a devil with the words, "Last Italy or an ING" beneath it. "Oh no," came a voice from behind him. Jerry stood in the doorway, his young face pale in the early morning light. "The kids have swimming lessons in 2 hours." Cooper was already taking photos with his phone, documenting each piece of damage. "Call Director Chen," he said calmly. "Then get the maintenance team down here. We need to secure the scene before anyone else arrives." As Jerry hurried away, Cooper noticed something the vandals had missed. In their rush to cause damage, they'd left clear boot prints in the sawdust near the workbench. He photographed these too, noting the distinctive tread pattern of motorcycle boots. An hour later, Director Chen stood in the boathouse, her hands shaking as she looked at the destruction. "The life jackets alone will cost thousands to replace," she said. "Insurance might cover it, but filing a claim means parents will find out," Cooper finished. He understood her worry. News of vandalism could destroy enrollment for next season. "We have to cancel water activities," Chen said, defeat in her voice. "We can't risk." "No," Cooper interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what they want. Give me 2 hours." He spent the next hour making calls to nearby summer camps, calling in favors from local contacts he'd made since arriving. By the time the first kids showed up for swimming lessons, borrowed life jackets and oars had arrived from 3 different camps around the lake. But while the children splashed safely in the water, Cooper was putting his military experience to use. He gathered the senior counselors in the dining hall, spreading out a map of the campgrounds on the table. "They're watching our routines," he explained, marking entry points with red pins. "Notice how they struck between night patrol shifts? They've been studying us." Jerry leaned over the map. "So what do we do?" "We changed the game," Cooper replied. He pulled out a box of new equipment, handheld radios, motion sensors, and small security cameras. "From now on, we run this camp like a forward operating base." He spent the afternoon training the staff in basic security protocols. The younger counselors learned radio codes and emergency signals. The maintenance team helped install solar-powered cameras at key points around the property. Even the kitchen staff were taught to report suspicious activity. "Remember," Cooper told them, "we're not soldiers, and this isn't a military operation. We're protecting children. That means being alert but not alarming the kids." That evening, Cooper called a special meeting with the older campers, the 13 to 15-year-olds. They sat in a circle in the main hall, looking nervous but curious. "I need your help," he told them honestly. "You're the senior campers. The younger kids look up to you. When they're scared, they watch how you react." Tommy, who had grown more confident since the tree incident, raised his hand. "What can we do?" Cooper smiled. "You can be brave, but smart. Stay in groups. Keep your radio on during activities. If you see something wrong, tell a counselor immediately. You're not here to fight. You're here to be leaders." The kids sat straighter, pride replacing fear in their expressions. Cooper had seen it before in war zones, how giving people a purpose could overcome their terror. Later that night, doing his rounds, Cooper found fresh motorcycle tracks by the lake. The bikers had been watching again, but this time they'd seen something different. Instead of scared children and helpless staff, they'd witnessed a camp transforming into a community that could defend itself. In his cabin, Cooper added the day's events to his growing file. The Devil's Hand had escalated from intimidation to destruction of property. Their next move would likely be worse. But as he reviewed the photos of boot prints and damage, he smiled slightly. They'd made another mistake. They'd given him evidence, patterns, and most importantly, they'd given his training mission a real sense of urgency. The camp was no longer an easy target. Now it was a community preparing to stand its ground, led by someone who knew exactly how to teach others to overcome their fears. Parent visiting day at Lake Pine Summer Camp started perfectly. Blue skies stretched overhead as families arrived in minivans and SUVs, eager to see their children after 3 weeks apart. The campgrounds had been decorated with colorful banners, and the smell of barbecue drifted from the picnic area. Cooper watched from his usual spot near the main office, noting how his security measures were working smoothly. Junior counselors with radios guided parking, while the older campers proudly showed their parents around in organized groups. Even Tommy was confidently leading his mom through a demonstration of his new camping skills. "Looks like a success," Director Chen said, joining Cooper with a cup of coffee. Maybe they finally got the message and... The distant roar of motorcycles cut her off. Cooper's radio crackled immediately, multiple bikes approaching from the North Road, at least 15 riders. Get the families into the dining hall and recreation center, Cooper ordered into his radio. Normal speed, no running. Make it look like part of the schedule. The counselors responded beautifully, smoothly guiding parents and children toward the buildings. Years of running fire drills made the evacuation look natural, but Cooper could see the fear returning to some of the kids' faces. The Devil's Hand arrived in force. 15 bikes roared into the parking area, led by Jake Martinez. They parked in a V formation, engines thundering. Parents pulled their children closer as the bikers dismounted, their leather vests displaying patches that marked them as full members. Martinez removed his helmet, his gold tooth glinting as he smiled at the crowd. "Hope we're not interrupting the family reunion," he called out loudly. "Just thought we'd stop by and see how our favorite summer camp is doing." Cooper moved forward, positioning himself between the bikers and the retreating families. He noted that at least 6 riders had visible weapons, knives on belts, chains wrapped around hands. Martinez himself wore a heavy vest that probably concealed something more serious. "You're trespassing on private property during a family event," Cooper announced, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Leave now, or I call the police." "Police?" Martinez laughed. "They're dealing with a big accident on the highway. Might take them, about an hour to respond." He stepped forward, spreading his arms. "Face it, soldier boy. You're outnumbered, and there's no backup coming." Inside the dining hall, Tommy watched through the window as his new hero faced down 15 bikers alone. The boy's mother tried to pull him away, but he stood firm. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "Mr. Cooper taught us not to show fear." Outside, Martinez was still talking, his voice getting louder. "This is what happens when you don't pay for protection. Bad things happen. And with all these parents watching," he grinned. "Well, imagine what they'll think about sending their precious kids back here next summer." Cooper didn't move, but his stance shifted slightly. A change so subtle only a trained fighter would notice. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Leave." "Or what?" Martinez stepped closer, his gang spreading out behind him. "You'll fight all of us. Come on, soldier boy. Even rangers know when they're beat." Cooper's voice remained calm, but carried across the parking lot. "You made 3 mistakes. First, you came during visiting day, when we have dozens of witnesses with phone cameras recording everything you do and say." Martinez's smile faltered slightly as he noticed the phones pointed at them from the dining hall windows. "Second," Cooper continued, "you announced that you knew about a traffic accident affecting police response times. Interesting thing for you to know about, isn't it?" Now some of the younger bikers were shifting uncomfortably, realizing their leader had admitted too much. "And third," Cooper's voice hardened, "you assumed I was alone." On cue, the camp's maintenance trucks rolled into view, blocking the bikers' exit. Local trucks from other summer camps appeared on the main road, their drivers, all veterans Cooper had contacted earlier, stepping out. From the boathouse came more parents, many of them in business suits but with military bearing that marked them as former service members. Martinez's face darkened as he realized he was surrounded. All his planning, all his intimidation tactics had led to this moment, but instead of cowering victims, he faced a prepared community standing together. Inside the dining hall, Tommy grinned as he watched the bikers' confidence crumble. Mr. Cooper had taught them well. Bullies aren't so tough when their targets refuse to be afraid and stand united against them. The Devil's Hand was about to learn that they hadn't just picked the wrong soldier to mess with. They'd picked the wrong community. The evening after the parent visiting day confrontation, Cooper sat in his cabin reviewing the videos parents had sent him. Each clip showed the Devil's Hand's intimidation attempt from different angles. More importantly, they clearly showed Martinez admitting knowledge of the accident that had tied up local police. "This is good," said Sheriff Williams, watching the footage on Cooper's laptop. The sheriff was a tall woman with graying hair and tired eyes. "But Martinez is smart. They'll claim he was just making conversation." Cooper nodded, pulling out his detail files. "That's why we need more. Look at these patterns." He spread photographs across his desk, showing motorcycle tracks, boot prints, and vandalism evidence. "They've been watching the camp, learning our schedules. That's not random harassment. It's organized intimidation. The sheriff studied the evidence. You've been busy, haven't you? Most people would just hired more security guards. Guards can be scared off, Cooper replied. I learned in the Rangers that the best defense is a community that stands together. That's why I've been training everyone. Later that morning, Cooper gathered the camp staff for a special session. The dining hall was quiet as he explained his plan. The Devil's Hand thinks they know our routines, he said, pointing to a map of the camp. But we've been feeding them what we want them to see. Those camera positions they spotted? Decoys. The real ones are hidden here, here, and here. He marked several unexpected locations. Jerry raised his hand. But what about the end of summer ceremony? It's our biggest event, and after yesterday. They'll definitely target it. Cooper finished. That's exactly what we want. He turned to the group of counselors. Each of you has shown incredible courage these past weeks. You've learned security protocols, emergency responses, and how to keep the kids calm under pressure. Now it's time to put it all together. Cooper spent the afternoon working with each team. The kitchen staff learned how to secure their area and protect the children if trouble started. The maintenance crew practiced emergency protocols. Even the art teachers were trained to guide kids to safe zones if needed. But Cooper's most important meeting was with the older campers. They gathered in the recreation center, sitting in a circle as he explained their role. You're not here to fight, he emphasized. You're here to be leaders. When the younger kids look scared, they watch you. When they need help, they come to you first. Tommy, who had become an unofficial leader among the campers, spoke up. Like how you stayed calm when the bikers came yesterday. Cooper smiled. Exactly. Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means not letting fear control you. He taught them simple hand signals for emergency communication. They practiced moving younger kids to safe areas without causing panic. Each teenager was paired with a specific group of younger campers they would be responsible for helping. As evening approached, Cooper met with a special group. Parents who had stayed after visiting day to help. Many were veterans like him, others were law enforcement or security professionals. They gathered around a table in the boathouse, reviewing plans. Martinez is desperate now, Cooper explained. The visiting day confrontation made him look weak in front of his gang. He has to prove he's still in control. That makes him dangerous, one parent said, a former Marine. Yes, Cooper agreed. But it also makes him predictable. They'll try something big at the end of summer ceremony, and we'll be ready. They spend hours going over every detail. Emergency response plans, evacuation routes, communication systems. Cooper had learned in combat that the best plans were simple, with clear roles for everyone. Later that night, doing his rounds, Cooper heard motorcycles in the distance. But this time, instead of fear, he felt ready. The camp had changed. Every person, from the youngest camper to the oldest staff member, knew their part in protecting their community. In his cabin, Cooper added final notes to his files. Tomorrow, they would start rehearsing their plans, making sure everyone knew exactly what to do. The Devil's Hand thought they were dealing with a simple summer camp. They had no idea they were about to face a united community, trained and prepared by someone who had spent years learning how to protect others from those who used fear as a weapon. The end of summer ceremony was 4 days away. When Martinez and his gang made their move, they would find out just how wrong they had been about Lake Pine Summer Camp and the people who called it home. The morning of the end of summer ceremony arrived with dark clouds gathering over Lake Pine. Cooper stood on the main stage, watching the final preparations. Colorful banners hung between trees, and rows of chairs faced the lake where the campers would perform their closing show. His radio crackled. Movement on the North Road. Multiple bikes approaching. Right on schedule, Cooper muttered. He clicked his radio twice, the signal everyone had practiced. Across the campgrounds, his plan smoothly went into action. The first raindrops fell as 20 motorcycles roared into view. Martinez led them, but this time they didn't stop at the parking lot. The bikes charged straight toward the ceremony area, spraying mud and gravel. Parents gasped as the bikers circled the seating area, engines drowning out the thunder. Martinez killed his engine in front of the stage. Quite a party you got here, he shouted over the rumbling bikes. Shame if something happened to ruin it. Cooper didn't move from his position. You're right on time, Jake. We've been expecting you. Martinez's smile faltered slightly. What are you talking about, soldier boy? Look around, Cooper said calmly. Really look. The bikers finally noticed what was different. The parents weren't running in panic. Instead, they sat calmly in their seats, many holding up phones to record everything. The kids weren't crying, the older ones were actually smiling, standing protectively near the younger campers. So what? Martinez snarled. You got some videos. Big deal. Not just videos, came a voice from behind him. Sheriff Williams stepped out from behind the stage, accompanied by several deputies. We've got you on multiple counts of criminal trespassing, vandalism, intimidation, and conspiracy. More vehicles appeared, blocking the escape routes. Cooper's veteran friends from other camps emerged, carrying themselves with military precision. The maintenance trucks moved into position, hemming in the bikes. You've got nothing, Martinez said, but his voice wavered. We have everything, Cooper replied. He nodded to Jerry, who clicked a remote. The large ceremony screen lit up, showing clear security footage. Bikers vandalizing the boathouse, placing the dead snake, setting up the traffic accident that distracted police on visiting day. Those cameras you spotted? Cooper continued. Decoys. The real ones caught everything, including your admission about the traffic accident, which the FBI is very interested in, by the way. The younger bikers began looking nervously at their surrounded bikes. Martinez's face darkened with rage. You think some cameras scare us? We're the devil's hand. We own this territory. He reached into his vest, but Cooper was faster. In one smooth motion, he jumped from the stage, swept Martinez's legs, and had him face down in the mud before anyone could blink. The move was so quick, so professional, that it froze everyone in place. Listen carefully, Cooper said quietly, his knee keeping Martinez down. You failed. The camp isn't afraid anymore. The community isn't afraid. Your own men can see it. Around them, the other bikers were raising their hands as deputies moved in. Some were already cooperating, looking relieved to be free of Martinez's influence. Tommy stood up from his seat, then all the other older campers followed. Soon the whole crowd was standing, phones recording as the Devil's Hand's reign of terror ended in the mud of a summer camp. You have two choices, Cooper told Martinez as Sheriff Williams approached with handcuffs. Surrender now and face the charges, or resist and add more charges. Either way, your days of terrorizing this community are over. The rain was falling steadily now, but nobody moved. They watched as Martinez was cuffed and led away, his legendary fearsome gang reduced to a group of wet, muddy men being rid their rights. Cooper looked at the gathered community, the brave campers, the dedicated staff, the supportive parents, and all the others who had stood together against intimidation. He led men in combat zones, but this victory felt different. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about showing people they could overcome their fears and protect what mattered. Thunder rolled across the lake, but this time not a single child flinched. Instead, Tommy started clapping. The sound spread through the crowd until everyone was applauding, not just for Cooper, but for themselves and the strength they had found together. The Devil's Hand had come to Lake Pine expecting to find easy victims. Instead, they found a community that refused to be intimidated, led by a man who had turned their own tactics against them. As the police vehicles drove away with their prisoners, the sun broke through the clouds, shining on a camp that would never be victimized again. 2 months after the dramatic end of summer ceremony, Cooper sat in Director Chen's office, reviewing applications for next year's camp season. The stack of papers was twice as high as last year's, and more kept arriving every day. It's amazing, Chen said, holding up another envelope. Parents are actually writing about how safe their children felt here. They're telling other families about us. She smiled at Cooper. And every single one of our staff members wants to return next season. Cooper nodded, thinking about how much had changed. The local newspaper article about the Devil's Hand's arrest had spread across the internet, turning Lake Pine into a symbol of community resistance against bullying. Martinez and his top lieutenants were facing serious federal charges, especially after investigators found evidence linking them to organized crime in 3 states. The sheriff called this morning, Cooper told Chen. The younger gang members took plea deals. Most of them are entering rehabilitation programs. Some even asked to apologize to the camp. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jerry poked his head in, grinning. You both need to see this. They followed him to the main hall, where a group of parents and former campers had gathered for a special presentation. Tommy stood at the front, looking much more confident than the boy who had once gotten stuck in a tree. On behalf of all the campers and families, Tommy announced, "We want to present something to Lake Pine." He pulled a sheet off an easel, revealing a beautiful wooden sign. It read, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the strength to face it together." "We're putting it up at the entrance," Tommy explained, "so everyone who comes here knows what kind of place this is." Cooper watched as parents and former campers shared stories about the summer. One mother talked about how her shy daughter had become a confident leader. A father described how his son had stood up to bullies at school, using the lessons he'd learned at camp about staying calm and seeking help from others. Later that afternoon, Cooper walked down to the boathouse. The building had been repaired and improved, its walls now decorated with photos from the summer. Not just the usual camping activities, but images of the community coming together, staff training sessions, older campers helping younger ones, families standing united at the final ceremony. He found Tommy there, looking at the photos. The boy had been coming back on weekends to help with maintenance and planning for next season. "Mom says I can be a junior counselor next summer," Tommy said excitedly. "I want to teach the new kids everything you taught us." Cooper smiled. "What's the most important thing you learned?" Tommy thought for a moment. "That being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared, and helping others do the same." The sound of a motorcycle made them both turn toward the lake. But it was just a parent arriving for the presentation, and Tommy didn't even flinch at the noise. None of the kids did anymore. That evening, Cooper added final notes to his reports. The Devil's Hand was finished, with most members in custody or cooperating with authorities. Their territory, as Martinez had called it, was being reclaimed by the communities they had terrorized. Other summer camps and businesses were adopting Lake Pine's security training programs. Director Chen had asked Cooper to stay on permanently as head of security and youth development. The role would involve not just protecting the camp, but teaching children and staff the principles that had helped them overcome their fears: community, preparation, and the courage to stand together against intimidation. As the sun set over Lake Pine, Cooper walked the grounds one last time before winter closing. The buildings were quiet now, but he could still hear echoes of children's laughter, still see the proud faces of campers who had discovered their own strength. His phone buzzed with a message from the sheriff. The last of the Devil's Hand members had taken plea deals. The case was officially closed, but Cooper knew the real story wasn't about defeating the bikers. It was about showing people they could protect themselves and their community when they stood together. Next summer's registration was already full, with a long waiting list. Parents weren't just sending their kids to learn camping and swimming anymore. They were sending them to Lake Pine to learn something more valuable: how to face their fears, stand up for what's right, and help others do the same. As Cooper locked the boathouse for the winter, he smiled at Tommy's new sign above the entrance. The Devil's Hand had tried to tear this community apart through fear. Instead, they had brought it together, making it stronger than ever. That would be their unintended legacy, a place where children learned that true courage means facing challenges not alone, but together.